I remember the exact moment those words left my mother's mouth. I was standing in our kitchen, holding my report card with 3 A's and 2 B's, proud of myself for the first time in months. My brother Marcus had just gotten home from his engineering firm, wearing his expensive suit and talking about some promotion he'd received. Mom barely glanced at my grades before saying it. "You'll never be as good as your brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, watching as she turned back to fussing over Marcus, asking him about his day, his accomplishments, his life. Dad nodded along from his chair, newspaper in hand, not even looking up. I was 17 years old, and in that moment, I realized I'd spent my entire life trying to be seen by people who had already decided I was invisible. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just looked at my mother, took a deep breath, and said the words that would change everything. "Watch me." Those 2 words felt like lightning in my chest. I saw my mother's eyebrows raise slightly, a flash of surprise crossing her face before she dismissed me with a wave of her hand. Marcus didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. He was too busy talking about his latest project, his latest success, his latest everything. But something had shifted inside me. Something fundamental had broken and reformed into something harder, something more determined. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling of my small room. The walls were covered with drawings I'd done over the years, sketches of buildings and landscapes, portraits of people I'd seen on the street. Art had always been my escape, my way of making sense of a world that didn't seem to have space for me. But my parents had always dismissed it as a hobby, something cute that would never amount to anything real. Marcus had been the golden child since birth. 3 years older than me, he'd excelled at everything he touched. Perfect grades, captain of the debate team, full scholarship to a prestigious university, now a successful structural engineer at 25. I'd grown up in his shadow, always compared, always found wanting. Every accomplishment I achieved was measured against his and deemed insufficient. I thought about my art teacher, Miss Patricia Chen, who'd been encouraging me for the past 2 years to apply to art school. She'd told me I had real talent, that my perspective was unique, that I could make something of myself in the creative world. But my parents had laughed when I'd mentioned it at dinner 6 months ago. Dad had said art school was for people who couldn't hack it in the real world. Mom had suggested I study something practical, like accounting or nursing, something that would guarantee a stable job. Marcus had just smirked and gone back to his phone. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in my mind. I was a senior in high school with 8 months until graduation. 8 months to prove that I could be something, that I wasn't just Marcus's disappointing little sister. I grabbed my sketchbook and started drawing before school, something I rarely had time for anymore. The lines flowed from my pencil with an urgency I hadn't felt before, shapes and shadows coming together to form a cityscape that felt alive on the page. At school, I found Miss Chen during lunch period. She was in her classroom, grading papers and eating a sandwich at her desk. She looked up when I knocked, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Jennifer, come in." "What brings you here?" I sat down across from her, my sketchbook clutched in my hands. "I want to apply to art school. I want to do this for real. But I need help." Miss Chen set down her red pen and leaned forward, her dark eyes studying my face. "What changed? Last time we talked about this, you seemed convinced your parents wouldn't support it." "They won't." But I realized last night that I've been living my whole life waiting for their approval. I'm done waiting. I'm going to do this with or without them. She smiled, and I saw pride in her expression. "That's the Jennifer I've been hoping to see." "Okay, let's talk about what you need to do. The application deadlines for fall admission are in about 4 months. You'll need to put together a portfolio, write personal statements, and get recommendations. It's going to be intense. I can handle intense. I need intense. And so began the most grueling 4 months of my life. I threw myself into creating a portfolio that would showcase everything I was capable of. I woke up at 5 every morning to work on pieces before school. I stayed up until midnight perfecting details, experimenting with different mediums, pushing myself beyond anything I'd attempted before. I worked through lunch periods, weekends, holidays. My grades in other classes started to slip slightly, from A's and B's to mostly B's and a few C's. But I didn't care. I was building something real. My parents barely noticed. They were too focused on Marcus's engagement to his longtime girlfriend, Stephanie, a corporate lawyer who fit perfectly into their vision of success. The house was consumed with wedding planning, discussions of career trajectories, talks of grandchildren. I moved through it all like a ghost, present but unseen. My best friend, Keisha, was the only person who really understood what I was going through. We'd been friends since middle school, bonding over our shared love of art and our shared experience of feeling like outsiders in our own families. Her parents were divorced, and she split her time between 2 households that both made her feel like an inconvenience. We'd spend hours at coffee shops, sketching and talking about the lives we wanted to build for ourselves. "Your mom really said that?" Keisha asked one Saturday afternoon as we sat in our favorite cafe, surrounded by our art supplies. I just told her about the kitchen incident. Word for word, like it was just a casual observation. Like she was commenting on the weather. Keisha shook her head, her long braids swaying with the movement. "That's messed up, Jen. You know that's not true, right? You're incredibly talented. Marcus can build buildings, but you can create entire worlds with just a pencil and paper." My parents don't see it that way. To them, if it doesn't come with a 6-figure salary and a fancy title, it doesn't count. Then prove them wrong, not because you need their approval, but because you deserve to live the life you want. Her words echoed in my mind as I worked on my portfolio pieces. I created a series of paintings exploring the concept of invisibility, figures fading into backgrounds, faces half-formed in shadows, bodies dissolving into cityscapes. I didn't realize until I was halfway through the series that I was painting my own experience, my own feeling of being unseen in my own home. Miss Chen helped me refine my personal statement, working through draft after draft until we'd crafted something that felt authentic and powerful. I wrote about growing up in a shadow, about finding my voice through art, about learning to see myself even when others looked past me. It was raw and honest, and it terrified me to send it out into the world. I applied to 8 schools, ranging from prestigious institutions to smaller specialized programs. Each application fee came from money I'd saved from my part-time job at a local bookstore, money my parents thought I was using for college textbooks and supplies for whatever practical major they assumed I'd choose. The waiting was excruciating. Applications went out in January, and responses wouldn't come until March or April. In the meantime, life at home became increasingly uncomfortable. My parents started asking about my college plans, assuming I'd apply to the state university where Marcus had done his undergraduate degree. When I was vague about my applications, they grew suspicious. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening in February. I'd been working on a piece in my room when my mother knocked and entered without waiting for a response. She was holding a letter from the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the top art schools in the country. "What is this, Jennifer?" My heart stopped. I'd been careful to check the mail every day, but I must have missed this one. It's a letter from a school I applied to. An art school. We discussed this. You're not going to art school. No, you discussed it. You told me what you wanted. I'm telling you what I want. My father appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Marcus was somewhere behind him, probably enjoying the drama. Jennifer, be reasonable, Dad said in his stern voice, the one he used when he expected immediate compliance. Art school is a waste of money and time. You need a real education. Art is real. My talent is real. My dreams are real. Mom's face hardened. Your dreams are childish. You need to grow up and face reality. You're not special, Jennifer. You're not going to be some famous artist. You're going to end up struggling and poor, and we're not going to support that. I never asked you to support it. I'm paying for the applications myself. I'll pay for school myself if I have to. With what money? Marcus finally spoke up from the hallway, his voice dripping with condescension. You make minimum wage at a bookstore. Do you have any idea how much college costs? I'll figure it out. Scholarships, loans, whatever it takes. My mother's laugh was bitter. You're being ridiculous. You'll never make it. This whole thing is a fantasy. Maybe, but it's my fantasy. My life. My choice. I'm 18 in 3 months. You can't stop me. The argument escalated from there, voices rising, accusations flying. They told me I was throwing my life away, being selfish, embarrassing the family. I stood my ground, my hands shaking but my voice steady. Finally, my father delivered his ultimatum. If you insist on pursuing this nonsense, don't expect any financial support from us. Not for tuition, not for living expenses, nothing. You'll be on your own. Fine. I've been on my own emotionally for years. Might as well make it official. I saw my mother flinch at that, a crack in her armor of disappointment, but she didn't take it back. None of them did. They left my room, and I closed the door behind them, sliding down to sit on the floor with my back against it. Only then did I let myself cry, great heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. But underneath the tears was something else. Relief, clarity, freedom. The worst had happened, and I'd survived. They'd said the words I'd always feared, made the threat I'd always dreaded, and I was still here, still standing, still determined. Keisha came over that night, climbing through my bedroom window the way she used to when we were younger. She held me while I cried, then helped me pack a bag. We spent the night at her mom's house, where her mother, Ms. Rodriguez, made us hot chocolate and told me I was welcome to stay as long as I needed. Family isn't always blood, Ms. Rodriguez said, her warm brown eyes full of compassion. Sometimes it's the people who choose to see you, to support you, to love you as you are. I moved in with Keisha and her mom the next day, taking only what I could fit in 2 suitcases and my art supplies. My parents didn't try to stop me. Marcus texted me once, a brief message saying I was making a mistake, but I didn't respond. I was done explaining myself to people who refused to listen. Living with the Rodriguez family was different from anything I'd experienced. Ms. Rodriguez worked as a nurse, long shifts that often left her exhausted, but she always made time to ask about our days, our dreams, our struggles. She treated my art with respect, asking questions about my process, genuinely interested in what I was creating. She put my paintings up on the walls alongside Keisha's photographs, creating a gallery of our shared creativity. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. The first one was from a good program in California, with a partial scholarship. I cried when I read it, and Ms. Rodriguez celebrated with homemade empanadas and a cake she'd picked up from the local bakery. Keisha took photos, capturing my joy, my disbelief, my relief. Then came the rejection from my top choice, the Rhode Island School of Design. That one hurt, a sharp disappointment that reminded me of every time I'd felt not good enough. But Keisha reminded me that I'd been accepted somewhere, that someone had seen my talent and valued it enough to offer me a place in their program. 2 weeks later, another acceptance arrived, this time from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, with a significant scholarship that would cover nearly 3/4 of my tuition. I stared at the letter for a full 5 minutes, reading and rereading it to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. They wanted me. They saw something in my work worth investing in. I called Miss Chen immediately, my voice shaking with excitement. I got in, full scholarship almost, Chicago. Her delighted squeal made me laugh. Jennifer, that's incredible. That program is phenomenal. You did it. You actually did it. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. The talent was always yours. I just helped you see it. The next challenge was figuring out how to afford the remaining costs. Even with the scholarship, I'd need money for housing, supplies, food, transportation. I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, started taking commissions for portraits and custom artwork, sold some of my pieces at a local art fair. Ms. Rodriguez refused to charge me rent, instead encouraging me to save everything I could. I also applied for every additional scholarship and grant I could find, spending hours filling out applications, writing essays, gathering documentation. Some days I felt overwhelmed by the logistics, paralyzed by the fear that I'd come so close only to have it fall apart because of money. But Keisha and Ms. Rodriguez kept me grounded, reminding me to take it one step at a time, one application at a time, one day at a time. In May, a month before graduation, I received a letter from a foundation that supported first-generation college students pursuing careers in the arts. They were offering me a grant that would cover my living expenses for the first year. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling, before I let myself believe it was real. Everything was coming together. Everything was actually happening. Graduation day was bittersweet. My parents didn't come. Marcus texted to say he was busy with wedding planning. But Ms. Rodriguez and Keisha were there, cheering loudly when my name was called, holding up signs they'd made. Miss Chen found me afterward, hugging me tightly and telling me how proud she was. I wore my cap and gown with my head held high, accepting my diploma from the principal who'd been told by my counselor about my achievements. He shook my hand for an extra moment, leaning in to whisper, "Don't let anyone dim your light, Jennifer." The world needs artists like you. The summer before college was a whirlwind of preparation. I worked constantly, saving every penny I could. I researched Chicago neighborhoods, found a small studio apartment near campus that I could afford with my grant money and earnings. I packed and repacked my belongings, trying to fit my entire life into what I could carry on a plane. The night before I left, Ms. Rodriguez threw me a small going-away party. It was just the 3 of us, plus a few friends from school and work. We ate too much food, laughed too hard, and cried when it was time to say goodbye. Ms. Rodriguez pulled me aside as the night was winding down, pressing an envelope into my hands. "Don't open it until you get to Chicago. And Jennifer, remember that you're not running away from your family. You're running toward yourself. That's not selfish. That's survival." The flight to Chicago was my first time on a plane. I pressed my face against the window, watching my hometown disappear beneath clouds, feeling equal parts terror and exhilaration. I was really doing this. I was really leaving behind everything familiar, everyone who'd ever known me as Marcus's little sister, the disappointing daughter, the invisible girl. Chicago welcomed me with September sunshine and an energy that felt electric. My studio apartment was tiny, barely room for a bed, a desk, and my art supplies, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, arranging my things with care, creating a space that reflected who I was becoming. On my desk, I opened Ms. Rodriguez's envelope and found $500 in cash with a note. For emergencies or dreams, whichever comes first, we love you. Make us proud. More importantly, make yourself proud. Classes started the following week, and I threw myself into them with an intensity that surprised even me. I took figure drawing, color theory, art history, sculpture, and digital design. Every class pushed me in different ways, challenging my assumptions, expanding my understanding of what art could be. My professors were accomplished artists themselves, people who'd built successful careers doing what they loved, and their existence felt like proof that my dream wasn't impossible. I met other students who understood the all-consuming passion for creating, who stayed up until dawn perfecting projects, who saw beauty in unexpected places. My roommate in my figure drawing class was a guy named David from Portland who could capture movement with just a few lines of charcoal. We became study partners, pushing each other to take more risks, to dig deeper into our work. David had his own story of family rejection. His father had wanted him to take over the family construction business. When David chose art instead, his father told him he was spitting on generations of family tradition. We bonded over our shared experience of disappointing our parents by choosing to disappoint ourselves less. But not everything was easy. The work was demanding, the critiques were brutal, and there were nights when I doubted everything. I'd stand in front of a canvas, brush in hand, and feel completely empty, like I'd used up every creative thought I'd ever had. The imposter syndrome was real, whispering that everyone else belonged here more than I did, that I'd gotten in by luck rather than talent. My first major critique in November nearly broke me. I'd spent 6 weeks on a mixed media piece exploring family dynamics and inherited expectations. I'd poured everything into it, every ounce of pain and anger and hope. When my professor, a renowned installation artist named Professor Martinez, stood in front of it during class, she was silent for a long moment. "This is technically proficient," she finally said, her voice measured, "but it's safe. You're holding back. I can see you protecting yourself in every brushstroke. If you want to create art that matters, you have to be willing to crack yourself open and show people what's inside, even when it's ugly or painful or uncomfortable. Right now, you're showing me what you think I want to see." "Show me what you need to say." I felt the tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall in front of the class. I nodded, thanked her for the feedback, and made it back to my apartment before I completely fell apart. I called Keisha, who was attending community college back home and working toward her photography degree. "She basically said my work is garbage," I sobbed into the phone. "That's not what she said, Jen. She said your work is good, but you can do better. She's pushing you because she sees your potential. That's exactly what you need." "It doesn't feel like that. It feels like she's saying I don't belong here." "No, she's saying you do belong there, but you're not showing up fully." "You've spent your whole life making yourself smaller so you wouldn't take up too much space. Now you're in a place where you're supposed to take up space, where that's literally the point, and you're still shrinking. Stop shrinking, Jen. Show them who you really are." Her words hit me like cold water. She was right. I was still operating from a place of not being good enough, still trying to please people who couldn't be pleased. I was at art school, surrounded by people who valued what I could create, and I was still holding back out of fear. The next day, I went back into the studio and started over. This time, I didn't think about technique or composition or what anyone would think. I just let myself feel everything I'd been pushing down for years and translated it onto the canvas. I worked in a frenzy for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, barely eating, completely consumed by the need to get it out, to make it real, to show the truth of my experience. The piece that emerged was raw and angry and beautiful. It was a large-scale mixed-media installation featuring fragmented mirrors reflecting distorted images, surrounded by paintings of hands reaching toward each other, but never quite touching. It was about being seen without being recognized, about existing in proximity to people who couldn't or wouldn't truly know you. It was about the space between who you are and who people want you to be. When I showed it to Professor Martinez in a private session, she studied it for several minutes without speaking. Then she turned to me with something like satisfaction in her eyes. "There you are. This is what I knew you were capable of. This is honest. This is powerful. This is art that makes people feel something." Don't ever go back to playing it safe. That piece became the cornerstone of my end-of-semester exhibition, and the response was overwhelming. Other students and faculty praised it. Art buyers from local galleries came to the student show and asked about my work, and for the first time, I felt like maybe I really could do this. Maybe I really could build a life as an artist. Winter break was strange. I couldn't afford to fly home, and even if I could, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Keisha and Ms. Rodriguez sent care packages with homemade cookies and warm socks. I spent Christmas with David and a few other students who'd stayed on campus, creating our own makeshift family dinner in his apartment. We cooked food we barely knew how to prepare, exchanged small handmade gifts, and talked about our dreams for the coming year. The week between Christmas and New Year's was particularly difficult. The city felt emptier, quieter, and the silence gave space for doubts to creep in. I found myself questioning everything in the early morning hours when sleep wouldn't come. Was I good enough? Had I made a mistake? Would I be able to sustain this life I was building? I spent hours walking through Chicago's winter streets, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air, my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets. The city in winter had a stark beauty that resonated with something inside me. The way the bare trees stood against gray skies, the way snow accumulated in corners and along edges, the way people hurried past each other wrapped in layers of protection. I started carrying a small sketchbook everywhere, capturing moments that caught my eye. An elderly woman feeding pigeons in Millennium Park, a child's abandoned mitten on a bench, bright red against white snow. The way light filtered through ice-covered branches. One particularly cold afternoon, I found myself in the Art Institute, wandering through the galleries with no particular destination in mind. I stood for a long time in front of a painting by Edward Hopper, studying the way he captured isolation and longing in everyday scenes. The figures in his paintings were always alone, even when surrounded by others, and I felt a kinship with them that made my chest ache. An older woman approached me as I stood there, studying the painting. She was elegantly dressed, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than they should. It speaks to you, doesn't it? This particular piece. I nodded, surprised by her directness. I've always loved Hopper's work, the way he captures that feeling of being separate, of watching life through a window rather than participating in it, as if there's always glass between you and the world. That's beautifully put. Are you an artist yourself? I'm trying to be. I'm a student at the School of the Art Institute. Her face lit up with interest. First year? Yes, it's been intense. The first year always is. I teach painting there, actually. Professor Eleanor Whitfield. I don't think you're in any of my classes, but I've learned to recognize that look. The one that says you're questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself and your work. I felt exposed, as if she'd read my mind. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been through it. The first year breaks you down so you can build yourself back up differently. It's necessary, but that doesn't make it any less painful. What's your focus? Mixed media mostly. Painting, installation work. I'm exploring themes of family, identity, invisibility. Professor Whitfield studied me with those penetrating eyes. Heavy themes for someone so young, but often the most powerful work comes from mining our own pain. The key is learning to transform it into something universal, something others can connect with. Otherwise, it's just therapy, not art. Her words stung a little, but I sensed the truth in them. How do you know the difference? Time, distance, craft. When you can look at your work and see it as separate from yourself, when you can recognize that you've created something that stands on its own merit rather than simply being a reflection of your feelings, that's when you know you've made art. It's a delicate balance, staying connected to the emotional truth while maintaining enough distance to shape it into something coherent and communicative. We talked for over an hour, moving through the galleries, discussing technique and intention, process and vision. She shared stories about her own early struggles, the rejections and failures that had shaped her into the artist and teacher she'd become. By the time we parted ways, I felt steadier, more grounded in my purpose. "Come find me next semester," she said as we stood near the museum exit. "I teach an advanced seminar on contemporary painting practices." "It's not required for first years, but I think you'd benefit from it. And Jennifer, don't let the doubt win. Doubt is useful in small doses. It keeps you questioning and growing. But too much will paralyze you. You're here because you earned your place. Remember that." On New Year's Eve, I stood on the roof of my building, watching fireworks light up the Chicago skyline. I thought about where I'd been a year ago, standing in my childhood kitchen with my report card, hearing my mother's words, feeling invisible and small. I thought about everything I'd survived and achieved since then. I thought about the girl I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I thought about Professor Whitfield's words about doubt and growth, about the necessity of being broken down to be built back up. I pulled out my phone, and for the first time in months, I opened my family's contact information. I didn't call or text. I just looked at their names, feeling the complex tangle of emotions they still evoked. Hurt, anger, disappointment, but also a strange kind of gratitude. Their rejection had forced me to find my own path, to discover reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I didn't forgive them exactly, but I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. That need had died somewhere along the way, replaced by something more sustainable. My own belief in myself. The spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. I enrolled in Professor Whitfield's advanced seminar, despite being only a first-year student. The class was small, just 8 students, and the level of discussion was intimidating. These were juniors and seniors who'd been honing their craft for years, who spoke fluently about art theory and movements I'd only begun to study. But Professor Whitfield had invited me, and I was determined not to waste the opportunity. The first class session was devoted to critiquing each student's current work. When my turn came, I showed images of the pieces I'd created during fall semester, including the raw installation that had emerged from Professor Martinez's challenge to stop playing it safe. The room fell silent as the images appeared on the screen, and I felt my face grow hot under the scrutiny. A senior named Thomas spoke first, his voice carefully measured. The technical execution is strong. Your use of mixed media is sophisticated. But I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to say. The fragmented mirrors, the reaching hands, it feels like visual cliches about isolation. Where's the surprise? Where's the moment that makes me see this familiar theme in a new way? His words felt like a punch to the gut. I'd poured everything into that work, had been praised for its honesty and vulnerability, and here he was dismissing it as cliched. I felt tears threatening and bit the inside of my cheek to hold them back. Professor Whitfield intervened, her voice calm but firm. Thomas raises a valid question, but I'd frame it differently. Jennifer, you've created emotionally resonant work that clearly speaks to your experience. What Thomas is pushing you to consider is how to take that personal truth and elevate it beyond the autobiographical. How do you surprise the viewer? How do you subvert expectations? How do you make them feel something unexpected alongside the familiar emotions of isolation and invisibility? Another student, a woman named Lucia with paint perpetually under her fingernails, leaned forward. I actually disagree with Thomas. I don't think the mirrors are cliched at all. The way you've fragmented them, the angles, the distortions, it creates this sense of being seen but misrecognized. Like people are looking at you, but seeing something else entirely. That resonated with me deeply. But I do wonder what would happen if you pushed it further. What if instead of reaching hands, you showed hands that had given up reaching? Or hands doing something completely mundane while the space around them screamed isolation. The contrast might be more powerful. The discussion continued for another 20 minutes, and by the end, my head was spinning with new ideas and perspectives. It was uncomfortable, having my work dissected so thoroughly, but it was also exactly what I needed. These students were pushing me to think more critically, to question my choices, to consider alternatives I hadn't imagined. I took an internship at a community art center on the South Side, teaching basic drawing classes to kids from low-income neighborhoods. The center was housed in a converted warehouse, with high ceilings and natural light streaming through large windows. It smelled like paint and possibility, and the energy of the place immediately felt like home. My supervisor was a woman named Monica, a sculptor in her 40s who'd grown up in the neighborhood and returned to give back. She had warm, dark skin, laughter lines around her eyes, and an infectious enthusiasm for art education. These kids don't get much exposure to art in school, Monica explained during my orientation. Budget cuts have eliminated most creative programs. For many of them, this center is their only opportunity to explore their creativity. Your job isn't just to teach them technique. It's to show them that their voices matter, that their perspectives have value, that art is for them too, not just for rich people in museums. The reality of teaching was humbling. Many of the kids I worked with came from challenging home situations. Some were dealing with violence in their neighborhoods, food insecurity, unstable housing. Art class was often the safest, most stable hour of their week, and they carried that weight with them into the room. Many of them reminded me of myself at that age, hungry for creative expression, but told by the world around them that art wasn't practical, wasn't valuable, wasn't for kids like them. I saw myself in their hesitation, their apologetic way of showing their work, their expectation that what they created wouldn't be good enough. One of my students was a 14-year-old girl named Amara, who had an incredible eye for detail, but struggled with confidence. She'd show me her sketches reluctantly, already apologizing for them before I'd had a chance to look. I saw so much of my younger self in her that it was almost painful. Amara came from a single-parent household. Her mother worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, and Amara was responsible for her 2 younger siblings after school most days. She'd arrive at art class tired, her school uniform wrinkled, but the moment she picked up a pencil, something in her face would shift. She'd become focused, present, alive in a way she wasn't at any other time. Her drawings were extraordinary. She had a gift for capturing emotion in faces, for finding the story in small details. A woman's weathered hands holding a coffee cup, a child's shoe worn through at the toe, the way light fell across an empty playground at dusk. But whenever I praised her work, she'd deflect, minimize, make excuses. Amara, why do you apologize before anyone's even given you feedback? I asked her one day after class. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Because it's probably not good enough. Says who? My mom, my teachers, everyone. They say art is nice as a hobby, but I should focus on real subjects if I want to get anywhere in life. My mom wants me to be a nurse or a teacher, something stable. She says artists starve. I pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. Let me tell you something. When I was your age, everyone told me the same thing. My parents, my teachers, everyone except one art teacher who saw something in me. And you know what? I believed them for a long time. I made myself small. I apologized for taking up space. I convinced myself that what I loved didn't matter. Amara looked up at me, her dark eyes curious. What changed? I got tired of being invisible. I got tired of living my life according to someone else's definition of success. And I decided that even if I failed, even if it was hard, even if everyone thought I was making a mistake, I needed to try. Because the alternative was spending my whole life wondering what might have been. Was it worth it? Choosing art? Every single day. It's hard, and there are moments when I'm scared, when I doubt myself, when I wonder if everyone was right. But then I create something that feels true, or I connect with someone through my work, or I stand in a gallery and see my pieces on the wall, and I know with absolute certainty that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Not because it makes money or impresses people, but because it makes me feel alive. I saw something shift in Amara's face, a spark of possibility. Over the following weeks, I watched her start to take up more space, to speak up about her work, to defend her choices. She started staying after class to work on more ambitious pieces, and I'd stay with her, offering guidance but mostly just being present as she found her own voice. One evening, as we were cleaning up after class, Amara showed me a portrait she'd been working on. It was her mother, rendered in charcoal with incredible sensitivity. Every line of exhaustion, every hint of strength, every shadow of worry was captured in the planes of her face. But there was also love in the drawing, a deep tenderness in the way Amara had rendered her mother's features. This is beautiful, Amara. Really beautiful. I want to give it to her for her birthday, but I don't know if she'll understand, if she'll see it as worth something. Give it to her anyway. Sometimes people need to be shown what they can't see on their own. Your mother works 2 jobs to take care of you and your siblings. That takes incredible strength. This drawing shows that you see her, really see her. That's a gift worth giving, regardless of how she responds. The following week, Amara came to class glowing. Her mother had cried when Amara gave her the portrait. She'd hung it on their living room wall, and she'd told Amara that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to support her art alongside practical considerations. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a beginning. Working with those kids reminded me why I'd fallen in love with art in the first place. It wasn't about impressing critics or winning awards or proving my parents wrong. It was about communication, connection, transformation. It was about taking the chaos inside and giving it form, making sense of experiences that otherwise felt overwhelming. It was about showing people they weren't alone, that their feelings mattered, that their perspective had value. Back in my classes, I was beginning to find my stride. Professor Whitfield's seminar pushed me to think more conceptually, to consider the theoretical frameworks underpinning contemporary art practice. We read essays by bell hooks, studied the work of artists like Kara Walker and Kerry James Marshall, who addressed issues of race and identity, explored how personal narrative could become political statement without sacrificing artistic integrity. I started a new series of paintings inspired by these discussions. Instead of focusing solely on my own experience of invisibility, I began exploring broader questions of who gets seen and who gets overlooked in society. I painted portraits of people I encountered in Chicago, the ones who kept the city running but remained largely invisible, the overnight janitor in our school building, an older Latina woman named Rosa who took pride in her work, the bus driver who greeted every passenger with a smile despite working 12-hour shifts, the street vendor selling tamales on cold winter mornings, his hands red from the cold. I asked each person for permission to paint them, spent time talking with them about their lives, their dreams, their struggles. These conversations enriched the work, adding layers of meaning I couldn't have achieved from imagination alone. Rosa told me about her 4 children, all college graduates, all successful in ways she'd never imagined possible when she immigrated to the United States 30 years ago. The bus driver, Marcus, shared that he wrote poetry in his spare time, carrying a small notebook to capture observations during his routes. The tamale vendor, whose name was Javier, had been an accountant in Mexico but couldn't get his credentials recognized here, so he'd built a small business from scratch, supporting his extended family on both sides of the border. Their stories wove into my paintings, informing the way I rendered their faces, their hands, their postures. This was work that felt important, that extended beyond my personal narrative, while still being grounded in authentic human connection. In March, I was selected to participate in a citywide emerging artists exhibition at a respected gallery in River North. It was a huge opportunity, a chance to show my work alongside established artists, to be seen by collectors and critics and other people who could open doors. I spent weeks preparing, creating new pieces, refining old ones, crafting artist statements that captured my vision. The selection process had been competitive. Over 200 artists had submitted portfolios, and only 30 were chosen. When I received the acceptance email, I'd been sitting in the library studying for an art history exam. I read the message 3 times before the reality sank in, then had to leave the building because I was crying too hard to stay quiet in the study space. David found me outside, sitting on the library steps despite the cold March wind. What happened? Are you okay? I showed him the email, unable to form words. He read it, then pulled me into a hug, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. You did it, Jen. You actually did it. This is huge. The exhibition would open in early April, which gave me less than a month to prepare. The gallery wanted 3 to 5 pieces from each artist, all centered around the theme of urban identity. I knew immediately which pieces I wanted to show: 3 from my Invisibility series and 2 new portraits from my series on overlooked workers. But the gallery space was significant, and I wanted to create one large-scale piece specifically for the exhibition, something that would command attention and tie my themes together. I spent every spare moment in the studio, working on a massive mixed media piece that combined painting, collage, and three-dimensional elements. The central image was a city street scene, but the people walking through it were rendered in different levels of opacity, some solid and vibrant, others fading into transparency. The ones fading were the workers, the service people, the ones who kept the city functioning but remained largely unseen. I incorporated actual objects into the piece: a bus transfer, a cleaning supply label, a food vendor's receipt, fragments of the real world that grounded the work in specificity. Professor Whitfield stopped by the studio one evening while I was working. She studied the piece in progress for a long time without speaking. "You're taking risks here. Combining so many elements could become chaotic, but you're managing to keep it cohesive. The opacity gradient is particularly effective. It's a visual metaphor that doesn't hit you over the head, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Do you think it's ready?" The exhibition is in 2 weeks. Art is never finished, only abandoned. But yes, I think you're close. My concern isn't the piece itself, it's you. You're pushing yourself very hard. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? I couldn't remember. I need to make this count. This is my first real opportunity to be seen by people in the art world. I can't waste it. Jennifer, listen to me. You're good enough already. The work you've created is strong. If you burn yourself out trying to achieve some impossible standard of perfection, you'll end up with nothing. Take care of yourself. Sleep. Eat properly. Your art can only be as healthy as you are. Her words reminded me of Ms. Rodriguez, that same blend of support and practical concern. I promised to try to rest more, though I wasn't sure I'd keep that promise. There was too much at stake, too much to prove. The opening night was terrifying. I stood in the gallery surrounded by people examining my work, listening to their conversations, watching their reactions. Some people loved what I'd created, others didn't understand it or dismissed it quickly. I had to remind myself that art was subjective, that not everyone would connect with my perspective, and that was okay. What mattered was that I'd been brave enough to put it out there, to show my truth and let people respond however they needed to. David came to support me, along with several classmates and professors. Professor Martinez spent a long time in front of my largest piece, a painting of a woman dissolving into a cityscape, her features fading but her eyes remaining sharp and focused. "This is your breakthrough work," she told me. "This is the piece people will remember." Professor Whitfield also came, bringing several colleagues from other departments. I watched nervously as they discussed my work, unable to hear what they were saying but seeing their engaged expressions, the way they kept returning to look at details, the animated nature of their conversation. A woman approached me midway through the evening, introducing herself as the owner of a smaller gallery in Wicker Park. She specialized in emerging artists and was interested in potentially representing me for a solo show in the fall. I could barely process what she was saying, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. A solo show, my own exhibition. It felt impossible, like something that happened to other people, not to girls who'd been told they'd never amount to anything. Patricia Liu was in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and an elegant sense of style. She had a reputation for discovering new talent, for taking chances on artists who weren't yet established. Several of her artists had gone on to significant careers, and gallery representation from her was considered a major step forward. "I've been watching the emerging artist scene in Chicago for 20 years, Patricia said as we stood in front of my large-scale city piece. "You have something special, a clear vision, technical skill, and more importantly, something to say. Too many young artists are just mimicking what they've seen in galleries without developing their own voice. You have a voice." I want to help you amplify it. We exchanged contact information, and she promised to reach out in a few weeks to discuss details. I floated through the rest of the evening in a daze, unable to fully believe it was real. Several other people approached me with interest, asking about my process, my background, my future plans. A local art critic who wrote for the Chicago Tribune spoke with me for 15 minutes, asking thoughtful questions about my themes and intentions. She said she'd be reviewing the exhibition in next week's paper. That night, back in my tiny apartment, I sat at my desk and pulled out the notebook where I'd been journaling since I left home. I wrote about the exhibition, about the gallery owner's offer, about how far I'd come in less than a year, and then, because I needed to acknowledge it fully, I wrote directly to my parents, words I knew I'd never send. You told me I'd never be as good as Marcus. You were wrong, not because I'm better than him, but because we're not comparable. We're different people with different gifts, different paths, different definitions of success. You measured my worth by his standards and found me lacking. But the truth is, your standards were never mine. I don't want the life Marcus has, the corporate ladder, the conventional markers of achievement. I want to create things that matter, that move people, that add beauty and meaning to the world. And I'm doing it, not to prove you wrong, though there's a part of me that takes satisfaction in that, but because this is who I am, and I'm finally brave enough to be her fully. The semester ended with final projects and exhibitions. My work was featured prominently in the school's annual showcase, and several local art magazines wrote reviews mentioning my pieces specifically. The Chicago Tribune critic wrote a glowing review of the Emerging Artists exhibition, calling my large-scale city piece a powerful meditation on visibility and value in urban spaces, executed with a maturity that belies the artist's age. I read that review so many times I could recite it from memory. I was building a name for myself, slowly but surely, establishing a reputation as an artist to watch. Summer brought the reality of needing to support myself between semesters. I couldn't go home, even if I'd wanted to, which I didn't. Instead, I stayed in Chicago, picking up more hours at a cafe near campus and continuing to teach at the Community Art Center. Monica offered me additional responsibilities at the center, including helping to plan the summer programming and mentoring older teens who were starting to think about college and career paths. I also started working on pieces for the potential solo show, creating a cohesive body of work that explored themes of identity, family, belonging, and self-definition. Patricia Liu had reached out in June to confirm the show for October. She wanted 12 to 15 pieces, all centered around a unified concept. We met several times over the summer to discuss my vision, and she pushed me to dig even deeper, to be even more vulnerable in my work. The gallery owner, whose name was Patricia Liu, reached out in June to confirm the show for October. She wanted 12 to 15 pieces, all centered around a unified concept. We met several times over the summer to discuss my vision, and she pushed me to dig even deeper, to be even more vulnerable in my work. The pieces that really sell, that really connect, are the ones where the artist has bled onto the canvas, Patricia told me during one of our meetings. Not literally, obviously, but emotionally. People want to feel something when they look at art. They want to be moved. Give them that. I spent the summer creating the most honest work of my life. I painted my mother's face, half in shadow, unable to see me standing right in front of her. I created a series of self-portraits showing my transformation from invisible to visible, from shrinking to expanding, from silence to speaking. I built an installation using family photos I'd taken from my room when I left. faces scratched out or obscured, representing the way we could be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. The work took a toll. Some days I'd arrive at the studio and just stand there, unable to pick up a brush because the emotions were too overwhelming. I was excavating old wounds, examining pain I'd tried to bury, forcing myself to be honest about experiences I'd rather forget. There were afternoons when I'd work myself into such an emotional state that I'd have to leave the studio and walk for hours through the city, trying to settle my racing heart and calm my churning thoughts. David noticed my struggle. He'd started staying in Chicago for the summer too, working on his own portfolio while doing freelance graphic design work to pay rent. We'd developed a routine of meeting for coffee most mornings before heading to our respective studios, checking in on each other's progress and emotional states. "You look exhausted," he observed one morning in early July, studying my face with concern. "I feel exhausted. This work is harder than I expected." "Every piece feels like I'm performing surgery on myself without anesthesia." "Maybe you need to take a break. You've been going nonstop since May." "I can't. The show is in 3 months, and I still have 5 more pieces to complete. Patricia is counting on me." "Patricia would rather you show up healthy than burn out and produce nothing." "You're no good to anyone if you collapse." I knew he was right, but I couldn't seem to slow down. The fear of failure, of disappointing people who'd invested in me, of proving my parents right after all, drove me forward even when my body begged for rest. I was running on coffee and adrenaline, sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, eating irregularly, pushing myself past reasonable limits. The breaking point came in mid-July. I was working on a particularly difficult piece, a painting of my family dinner table with empty chairs and ghostly figures, when suddenly I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision tunneled, and panic flooded my system. I dropped my paintbrush and sank to the floor, gasping for air, convinced I was dying. Monica found me there 20 minutes later, still on the floor, still struggling to breathe normally. She sat down beside me, her calm presence anchoring me back to reality. "First panic attack?" she asked gently. I nodded, too shaken to speak. "Been there, more times than I can count." "Let's get you home, and then we're going to have a conversation about sustainable creative practice." She drove me back to my apartment, made me tea, and sat with me until the shaking stopped. Then she told me her own story. About burning out spectacularly at 23, pushing herself so hard to prove she belonged in the art world that she ended up hospitalized with exhaustion. About learning the hard way that sustainable creativity required rest, boundaries, and self-compassion. "You can't make art from an empty well," Monica said. "You have to fill yourself up before you can pour into your work. That means sleeping, eating real food, taking actual breaks, doing things that have nothing to do with art." "Otherwise, you'll burn so bright and so fast that you'll flame out before you've barely begun." Over the following weeks, I learned to pace myself. I set boundaries around studio time, forcing myself to leave by 8 every evening regardless of where I was in a piece. I started cooking real meals instead of surviving on coffee and granola bars. I took Sundays off completely, spending the day reading novels, walking along the lakefront, visiting museums just for pleasure rather than study. It felt uncomfortable at first, almost indulgent, but gradually I noticed the difference. My work improved when I approached it rested. I made better decisions, saw solutions more clearly, felt less desperate and more confident in my choices. It was painful work, forcing me to confront emotions I'd been avoiding. There were days when I couldn't paint because I was crying too hard, days when I had to walk away from the studio because the memories were too overwhelming. But there were also moments of catharsis, of release, of transforming pain into something meaningful. Each finished piece felt like a small victory, a way of taking something that had hurt me and reshaping it into something that might help others feel less alone. Keisha visited me in August, spending a week in Chicago before her own fall semester started. She'd been accepted into a competitive photography program and was excited about her own artistic journey. We spent hours in my studio, working on our respective projects, occasionally offering feedback, or just sitting in companionable silence. "Your parents are idiots," Keisha said one evening as she photographed one of my new paintings. "This work is incredible. You're incredible." And they're missing out on knowing this version of you. I think they preferred the version that didn't challenge them, that made herself small so they could feel big. Their loss. Seriously, Jen, look at what you've built. A year ago, you were living in their house, convinced you'd never escape. Now you're in Chicago, about to have a solo show, building a career doing what you love. You did that. You chose yourself, and look what happened. Her words settled into me, and I realized she was right. I had chosen myself. Over and over again, in big ways and small ways, I'd made decisions that honored who I was rather than who others wanted me to be. And it had led me here, to this life I was creating, to this person I was becoming. One afternoon in late August, I received an unexpected visitor at the studio. A woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed with kind eyes, introduced herself as Dr. Evelyn Winters, a professor emerita from Northwestern University who specialized in contemporary art. She'd seen my work at the Emerging Artists exhibition and had been following my progress through Patricia Liu. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," she said. "Patricia mentioned you were working on new pieces, and I was curious to see where you were taking your practice." I showed her around the studio, nervous about her professional assessment. She studied each piece carefully, asking questions about my process and intentions. When she reached the painting of my mother, she stood there for several long minutes without speaking. "This one," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "This one captures something essential about the pain of not being seen by the people who should see you most clearly. My own mother never understood me, never approved of my choices. We had a difficult relationship until she died 10 years ago. Looking at this painting, I feel that old ache, but also a strange comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in that experience." We talked for over an hour about art, family, identity, and the courage required to be vulnerable in creative work. Doctor. Winters shared that she was curating a group exhibition for the following spring focused on emerging voices in Midwestern art. She wanted to include one of my pieces if I was interested. "I don't usually make these kinds of offers to first-year students," she said. "But your work is mature beyond your years. You have something important to say, and you're saying it with clarity and conviction." That's rare at any age, but particularly at yours. Another door was opening, another opportunity presenting itself. I kept waiting for someone to realize I didn't belong, that I'd gotten lucky rather than earning my place. But the opportunities kept coming, and slowly, I began to believe that maybe I did deserve them, that maybe my talent was real and my voice mattered. As summer turned to fall and my show approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This was it, my first major solo exhibition, my chance to show the art world who I was and what I had to say. Patricia had invited critics, collectors, other artists, people who could make or break an emerging career. The pressure was intense, but underneath the nerves was a deep sense of rightness. This was what I was meant to do. The final weeks before the exhibition were a blur of activity. I was completing the last pieces, working with Patricia on the installation layout, writing final drafts of my artist statement, coordinating with the gallery on promotion and opening night logistics. I'd also started my sophomore year classes, which added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming schedule. One evening in late September, I received a call from Ms. Rodriguez. Her voice sounded strained, worried. "Mija, I wanted you to hear this from me. Your mother called me yesterday." My stomach dropped. What did she want? She was asking about you. How you were doing, whether you were okay, if you needed anything. She said she'd been following your career online, saw the announcements about your solo show. She wanted to know if I thought you'd be open to her coming to Chicago for the opening. I sat down heavily on my bed, my mind racing. What did you tell her? I told her that was a conversation she needed to have with you directly, not through me. But Jennifer, I need to ask, do you want her there? Did I? I'd spent the past year and a half building a life without my parents, proving to myself that I didn't need their approval or validation. The work in the exhibition was directly about that experience, about the pain of being unseen by the people who were supposed to love you most. Having my mother there felt complicated, potentially undermining the very story I was trying to tell. But another part of me, a part I'd tried to silence, still wanted her to see what I'd accomplished. Still wanted her to understand what she'd almost destroyed and what I'd built in spite of her. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell her no, that she doesn't get to show up now after everything. But another part wants her to see the work, to understand what her words did to me, and what I've become despite them. There's no wrong answer here, Mija. Whatever you decide, we support you. But don't let anyone pressure you into a reconciliation you're not ready for. You've worked too hard to let someone else's presence derail your moment. I thought about it for days, unable to reach a decision. I talked it through with Keisha, with David, with Monica. Everyone had opinions, but ultimately the choice was mine. Finally, 3 days before the opening, I sent my mother a brief email. Ms. Rodriguez told me you'd been asking about me. The exhibition opens on October 10th at 7 p.m. at the Liu Gallery in Wicker Park. The address is included in the attached press release. If you come, I need you to understand something. This work is about my experience of being invisible in my own family. It's not comfortable, and it's not flattering. I've created it with honesty and vulnerability, and I won't apologize for any of it. You're welcome to attend, but only if you can respect that this is my truth, even if it's painful to hear. I didn't receive a response, and I didn't know if that meant she wasn't coming or if she simply didn't know what to say. Either way, I had to focus on the exhibition itself. I couldn't let the possibility of her presence distract me from the work. The day before the opening, I went to the gallery to help with the installation. Seeing my work on the walls, professionally lit and arranged, took my breath away. It looked real. It looked legitimate. It looked like the work of someone who belonged in this world. Patricia had done an incredible job with the layout. The pieces flowed in a narrative arc, beginning with the Invisibility series from my first semester, moving through the portraits of overlooked workers, and culminating in the raw, honest pieces about family that I'd created over the summer. The final piece, the painting of my mother unable to see me, was positioned as the centerpiece, commanding the main wall of the gallery. Patricia stood beside me, surveying the space with a critical eye. You should be proud of yourself, Jennifer. This is a strong show. The work is cohesive but varied, technically impressive but emotionally resonant. You're telling a story that people need to hear. What if no one comes? What if people hate it? People will come. Some will love it, some won't, and that's fine. But I guarantee you, the The people who need to see this work will see it, and it will impact them. Trust in what you've created. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through everything that could go wrong, every possible disaster. What if my mother showed up and caused a scene? What if no one understood the work? What if critics dismissed it? What if this was the moment everyone realized I'd been faking my way through and didn't actually belong here? Opening night arrived with a clarity that surprised me. Standing in front of my closet, trying to decide what to wear, I realized that the outcome of this evening didn't actually change who I was or what I'd accomplished. Whether people loved the work or hated it, whether my mother showed up or didn't, whether critics praised me or panned me, I'd still done something incredible. I'd created a body of work that was honest and vulnerable and technically accomplished. I'd told my story in the most authentic way I knew how. That was the real victory, and no one could take it from me. The gallery filled with people, more than I'd dared to hope for. I watched them move through the space, studying my paintings, reading my artist statements, discussing what they saw. Some people approached me to share how my work resonated with their own experiences of family rejection or self-discovery. A few critics asked thoughtful questions about my process and intentions. Several collectors expressed serious interest in purchasing pieces. David came, along with Professor Martinez and several of my classmates. Ms. Rodriguez and Keisha had flown in to surprise me, and when I saw them enter the gallery, I burst into tears and rushed to hug them both. "We wouldn't have missed this for anything," Ms. Rodriguez said, holding me tight. "Look at you, mija. Look at what you've accomplished." We walked through the exhibition together, and I explained each piece, shared the stories behind them. They listened with the attention and care they'd always shown me, asking questions, offering observations, celebrating my vulnerability and courage. Toward the end of the evening, a middle-aged couple approached me. The woman had been crying, and the man looked deeply moved. "We wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "Our daughter is 19, and she wants to be a writer, but we've been pushing her toward pre-law. We've been telling her that creative careers aren't stable, that she needs something practical. But seeing your work tonight, seeing what you've created from your pain and your persistence, it made us realize we've been doing to her what was done to you." "We're going to talk to her tonight and tell her we support whatever path she chooses. You've shown us what we were too blind to see." I didn't know what to say. I hugged them both, crying harder, overwhelmed by the realization that my story, my art, my choice to be vulnerable, had reached someone and potentially changed the trajectory of another young artist's life. This was why I made art. This moment, this connection, this transformation. By the end of the night, Patricia informed me that 3 pieces had sold, with several others on hold pending second viewings. More importantly, I'd connected with people, started conversations, made an impact. The exhibition would run for 6 weeks, and Patricia was already talking about future opportunities, other galleries interested in my work, the possibility of being included in a group show in New York. Walking home that night, exhausted and exhilarated, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From that moment in the kitchen when my mother's words had shattered me, to this night when I'd stood in a gallery full of people engaging with my truth, I'd been broken open, and instead of putting myself back together the same way, I'd rearranged the pieces into something new, something stronger, something wholly my own. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in over a year. I sent a text to my family group chat. "I had my first solo art exhibition tonight. 3 pieces sold. I'm building a career as an artist. I'm happy. I'm proud of myself. I hope someday you can be proud of me too. But if not, that's okay. I'm finally proud enough of myself for all of us. I didn't wait for a response. I turned off my phone and kept walking, letting the cool October air clear my head. Whether they responded or not, whether they ever understood or not, I'd said what I needed to say. I'd closed that circle, not with anger or bitterness, but with simple truth. My phone stayed off for the rest of the night and most of the next day. When I finally turned it back on, there were several messages waiting. Keisha and Ms. Rodriguez with congratulations and love. David with a photo he'd taken of me standing in front of my work, looking confident and radiant. Professor Martinez with encouragement and news about another opportunity. And then, unexpectedly, a message from Marcus. Saw your text. Looked up your exhibition online. The reviews are impressive. I don't understand art the way you do, but I can see that you're good at it. Really good. I'm sorry I never paid attention before. I'm sorry I was part of making you feel less than. You're not less than. You're just different. And different is okay. It wasn't everything I might have wanted. It wasn't a full apology from my parents or an acknowledgement of all the hurt they'd caused, but it was something. It was recognition. It was a crack in the wall, and through that crack came a sliver of light. I didn't respond right away. I sat with his words, letting them settle, deciding what they meant to me. And I realized that while his acknowledgement felt good, it didn't change anything fundamental. I'd already done the work of validating myself. His words were a nice addition, but they weren't necessary. I'd already become whole without them. The weeks following the exhibition were a blur of activity. I continued with school, where my professors treated me differently, with a new respect that came from seeing my work succeed in the professional world. I took on more teaching hours at the Community Art Center, feeling increasingly passionate about helping young artists find their voices. I worked with Patricia on potential future shows and started building relationships with other galleries. In November, I received an unexpected email from my mother. The subject line just said, "Your brother showed me." The email was short, carefully worded. "Jennifer, Marcus showed me your exhibition online and some of the reviews. I don't understand much about art, but I can see that people respect what you're doing. I realize we never gave you credit for your talent. I realize we hurt you with our expectations and our comparisons. I don't know if you'll accept an apology at this point, but I want to offer one anyway. We were wrong. You were right to follow your path. I'm trying to understand, even if it's later than it should be." I read the email 3 times, feeling a complicated swirl of emotions. Relief that she was finally seeing me, anger that it had taken public recognition for her to value my work, sadness for all the years of feeling invisible, hope that maybe we could build something new even after everything that had broken. I waited 2 days before responding, taking time to figure out what I wanted to say. "Mom, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the apology. I'm not ready to come home or pretend everything is fine, because it's not, and that's going to take time to work through. But I'm open to trying to build a new kind of relationship, one where you see me as I actually am rather than as you wanted me to be. I'm different from Marcus, and that's okay. I'm different from what you planned, and that's okay too. I'm happy with my life and my choices." If you can accept that, we can start from there. Her response came the next day, shorter but sincere. "That's fair. I'll try. I love you, even if I haven't shown it well." It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. We didn't suddenly have a perfect mother-daughter relationship. But it was a beginning, a tentative reaching across the divide that had separated us. We started emailing occasionally, short messages about our lives, carefully avoiding the deeper wounds until we were both ready to address them. It was imperfect and uncertain, but it was something. My father never reached out, and I made peace with that. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, and that was okay. I'd built a new family from the people who chose to see me, to support me, to love me as I was. Blood didn't determine family. Choice did. As my sophomore year continued, opportunities kept appearing. I was invited to participate in a group exhibition in New York, was featured in an online art magazine, received a grant to continue my work with underserved youth. Each success built on the last, creating momentum, opening doors, validating my choice to trust myself over the doubts of others. Amara, my student from the Community Art Center, told me in December that she'd decided to focus on developing her portfolio for art school applications. Her mother wasn't happy, but Amara had decided, like I had, that she needed to honor her gifts even if others didn't understand them. Watching her step into her power, knowing that I'd played even a small part in that transformation, felt like the most meaningful success of all. On New Year's Eve, I stood again on my building's roof, watching fireworks paint the sky. 2 years had passed since that moment in the kitchen, since my mother's words had cracked something open inside me. 2 years of struggle and growth, of breaking and rebuilding, of learning to trust myself even when the world told me I was wrong. I thought about the girl I'd been, desperate for approval, convinced she was invisible, afraid to take up space. I thought about the choice I'd made to believe in myself when no one else would. I thought about everything I'd survived and achieved, the life I'd built from nothing but determination and talent and stubborn hope. My phone buzzed with messages. Keisha sending love, Ms. Rodriguez sharing pride, David making plans for the new year. Professor Martinez encouraging me to apply for a prestigious summer residency. And, unexpectedly, my mother, sending a simple message. Happy New Year, Jennifer. I'm proud of you. 3 words. Simple, overdue, imperfect, but real. I smiled, typed a quick response, and then put my phone away. I didn't need her pride anymore, not the way I once had. But it was nice to have, like finding money in an old coat pocket. A pleasant surprise, but not essential to my survival. What I had was better. I had faith in myself, in my abilities, in my worth. I had a community of people who saw me and valued me. I had work that mattered, that connected me to others, that gave my life meaning and purpose. I had the courage to keep showing up, to keep creating, to keep being vulnerable even when it was scary. I had proven to myself what I'd set out to prove that night in the kitchen. I'd shown that I could be more than anyone expected, that I could build a life on my own terms, that I could transform pain into purpose and rejection into resilience. Standing there under the fireworks, I made a new promise to myself. Not to prove anyone wrong, not to chase validation or approval, but simply to keep being brave, to keep creating honestly, to keep choosing myself over and over again. Because that choice, that continuous act of self-belief and self-determination, was the greatest work of art I'd ever create. Not a painting on a wall, but a life built from nothing but will and talent and the refusal to be small. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility. There would be more challenges, more rejections, more moments of doubt. But there would also be more growth, more connections, more triumphs. And through it all, I would keep showing up as myself, fully and unapologetically. My mother had said I'd never be as good as my brother. She'd been right in a way she never intended. I wasn't as good as Marcus. I was something entirely different, something that couldn't be compared or measured by someone else's standards, something uniquely, powerfully, beautifully mine. And that, I'd learned, was more than good enough. It was everything.